They told Holly he was incapable, cold, distant, a man who could never satisfy a woman. She accepted the marriage of convenience, believing she was safe from any danger. But when Dylan raised his eyes at the altar and looked at her as if undressing her with his gaze, something inside her awakened. The brief touch of his hands as they signed the contract sent a shock through her body, and that night he would prove that everyone was completely wrong. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave your like and become a member to get early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt it was really worth listening to, also click the Super Thanks button. Your gesture makes all the difference and helps us continue bringing stories that move you. Holly Bennett never imagined she'd be standing there, before an altar decorated with white lilies and blue hydrangeas, wearing a wedding dress that cost more than she'd earn in an entire year, about to marry a man she barely knew, a man about whom terrible things were whispered, cold, incapable, unfit to satisfy a woman. The words echoed in her mind like a protective mantra. It was just a contract, a financial arrangement, nothing more. She would be safe. There would be no passion. There would be no danger. There would be nothing. But when Dylan Harrington raised his eyes and looked at her for the first time that sunny June morning, something inside her trembled. His eyes were stormy grey, deep as the ocean before a storm. And the way they observed her, slowly, deliberately, tracing every feature of her face as if memorizing a work of art, made the air escape from her lungs. It wasn't a casual glance. It wasn't polite. It was intentional, loaded, as if he could see through the tulle veil, through the silk dress, through all the layers of protection she had built around her heart. Holly blinked, trying to pull herself together. "It's just a marriage of convenience," she repeated to herself. "He doesn't feel anything. You don't feel anything." But her body disagreed. The officiant began to speak, but the words were just distant noise. Holly was mesmerized by his presence. Dylan wore an impeccable black tuxedo, the fabric embracing his broad shoulders perfectly. The silk tie was perfectly adjusted. His dark hair, combed back, revealed a face of striking lines, defined jawline, firm lips, a small scar above his left eyebrow that she'd never noticed before. He was tall, imposing, and radiated a silent authority that made people around him instinctively bow, but it was his scent that disarmed her. A masculine fragrance, woody with notes of sandalwood and something slightly citrus, that invaded her senses every time he moved. When he stepped forward to stand beside her, that aroma enveloped her like an invisible embrace, and she felt her legs weaken. "Holly Bennett," the officiant said, smiling, "do you take Dylan Harrington to be your lawfully wedded husband?" She opened her mouth, but her voice didn't come out. Dylan's eyes were fixed on her, waiting. Not with impatience, but with an intensity that made her feel as if she were being stripped bare, layer by layer, until only the truth remained. "Yes," she finally whispered, her voice hoarse. His lips curved slightly. It wasn't quite a smile. It was something more dangerous, something that said, "I know what you're feeling, and you're not prepared for what comes next." "Dylan Harrington," the officiant continued, "do you take Holly Bennett to be your lawfully wedded wife?" He didn't look away, not for a second. "I do." His voice was deep, resonant, vibrating at a frequency that seemed to echo inside her chest. 2 words, just 2, but loaded with an unspoken promise that made Holly's heart race. "Then, by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." The world stopped. Holly felt panic rising in her throat. A kiss. She hadn't thought about this. Not really. She thought it would just be a quick peck, chaste to fulfill the formality. But when Dylan stepped forward, closing the space between them, she realized that nothing about this man was chaste. He raised his hand slowly, his fingers touching the veil with a delicacy that contrasted with the intensity of his gaze. With calculated movements, he lifted the fabric, revealing her face completely. His eyes traveled over every detail, the line of her lips, her flushed cheeks, her trembling lashes. "Breathe," he murmured, so low that only she heard. She didn't know she'd been holding her breath until he said that. Dylan tilted his head, approaching slowly, so slowly that each second seemed like an eternity. Her heart beat irregularly. The air between them was charged, electric, vibrating with a tension she couldn't name. She could feel the heat emanating from his body, could see the small golden flecks in his grey eyes, could hear her own accelerated breathing mixing with his. And then he kissed her. It wasn't quick. It wasn't chaste. It was slow, firm, dominant. His lips captured hers with a precision that stole any rational thought. It was a kiss of possession, of claiming, of intention. He didn't ask permission. He simply took. And, to her own astonishment, Holly surrendered. When he pulled away, his eyes gleamed with something she couldn't decipher. Satisfaction, challenge, desire. "My wife," he said softly, as if testing the words. And then he smiled. Slightly. As if he knew exactly the effect he had on her. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. They signed the documents, smiled for photos, received congratulations from guests she barely knew. But the only moment that mattered, the only one etched in her memory with crystal clarity, was when Dylan held her hand to sign the marriage contract. He intertwined his fingers with hers, the touch firm, warm, enveloping. And when their palms pressed together, she felt it. A shock. An electric current that ran up her arm, down her spine, and spread throughout her body, igniting every nerve ending in its path. She looked at him, surprised, and found that smile again. That smile that said, "I felt it too." "Nervous?" he asked, his voice husky and low as he guided her hand over the paper. "No," she lied. "You should be." His tone wasn't threatening. It was promising, as if he were warning her that the danger wasn't where she imagined. It wasn't in his coldness. It wasn't in the distance. It was right there, in the proximity, in the heat, in the way he looked at her as if she were the only woman in the world. When they finished signing, Dylan brought her hand to his lips and placed a light, almost reverent kiss on her fingers. But his eyes never left hers, and in that look, Holly saw everything he didn't say out loud. "You're mine now, and I'm yours. And what comes next will change everything." She swallowed hard, trying to control the whirlwind of emotions consuming her. Fear, excitement, anticipation, desire. Maybe the danger lives exactly where you thought you were safe. And as he guided her out of the church, his hand firm at the small of her back, Holly realized an unavoidable truth. She wasn't safe. She never was. And perhaps she never wanted to be. The bridal suite was everything Holly imagined it would be. Luxurious, imposing, perfect in every detail. The main room of the five-star hotel was decorated in shades of ivory and gold. A king-size bed dominated the center of the space, covered in satin sheets that shimmered under the soft light of the lamps. White roses adorned every corner, their sweet, delicate perfume floating in the air. There was champagne in an ice bucket, chocolate-covered strawberries on a silver tray, scented candles lit on the fireplace. It was romantic. It was seductive. It was absolutely terrifying. Holly stood frozen at the entrance, clutching her small purse, unable to take another step. Her heart was beating so hard she was certain Dylan could hear it from across the room. He entered behind her, closing the door with a soft click that echoed like thunder in her ears. For a moment neither of them moved. The silence was thick, heavy, loaded with a tension that seemed to suck all the oxygen from the room. Dylan was the first to break the stillness. He walked to the sofa near the window, his steps firm and measured on the Persian rug. Without saying a word, he began to remove his tuxedo jacket. Each movement was slow, deliberate, as if he were conscious that she was watching every gesture. He hung the jacket on the back of an armchair, then brought his hands to his tie. His long, skilled fingers undid the knot with a precision that made Holly's mouth go dry. The tie slid through the collar and was placed beside the jacket. Then he began to undo the buttons of his shirt, one by one, slowly. So slowly it seemed deliberate. The first button revealed the base of his neck, the second, the line of his chest, the third, a bit more of tanned, firm skin. Holly held her breath when he opened two more buttons. exposing defined forearms and a strip of abdomen that made it clear he took care of himself. Sculpted muscles, smooth skin, a trail of dark hair descending. She quickly looked away, feeling the blush rise up her neck and flood her cheeks. "You can use the bathroom first," Dylan said, his deep voice cutting through the silence. He didn't look at her directly, but there was something in his tone, something controlled, tense, that made her stomach flip. "Thank you," she murmured, grabbing the small suitcase that had been left in the room earlier. Holly practically ran to the bathroom, closing the door behind her and leaning against it, trying to catch her breath. What's happening to me? She had married a man who supposedly couldn't satisfy a woman. A cold man. Distant. So why did every look from him make her feel like she was burning from the inside? She took a quick shower, letting the hot water relax her tense muscles. Then she put on the silk nightgown her best friend had insisted she buy, a simple style white, with thin straps and a cut that ended mid-thigh. It wasn't provocative, but it wasn't exactly modest either. She put a robe over it, tying it firmly at the waist, and took a deep breath before opening the door. When she came out of the bathroom, Dylan was standing beside the bed, his back to her. He had changed his dress pants for dark pajama bottoms and a tight t-shirt that outlined every muscle of his back. His hair was slightly damp, as if he'd splashed water on his face at the sink. He was holding a glass of whiskey, watching the lit city through the panoramic window. For a moment she just stood there watching him. There was something in his posture, in the slightly tense shoulders, in the way he held the glass tighter than necessary, that made her realize he wasn't as calm as he pretended to be. "Make yourself comfortable," he said without turning around, as if he'd sensed her presence. "The bed is yours, I'll sleep on the couch." The words hit her like a bucket of cold water. "On the couch," she repeated, her voice higher than intended. "Yes." He finally turned around, and the look that fell on her was like liquid fire. His eyes traveled over her face, descended down her robe, lingered for a second longer on her exposed legs below the fabric, and then returned to her face. He swallowed hard, his hand gripping the glass tighter. "I thought you'd prefer it that way." I didn't say that. You didn't need to." He took a step forward, approaching slowly. With each step, Holly's heart accelerated more. "You've been tense since we walked in here, scared. I'm not going to touch you, Holly, not until you ask me to." The way he said it, "not until you ask me to," made something inside her contract. It wasn't a declaration of indifference. It was a promise, a provocation, as if he knew that eventually she would ask, and when she did, there would be no going back. "I'm not scared," she lied, raising her chin in defiance. His lips curved into a half-smile. He took another step, getting so close she could feel the heat emanating from his body, could see the small water droplets still clinging to the strands of hair at his temple, could smell the intoxicating scent of his aftershave mixed with something purely masculine. "No?" he murmured, his voice dropping an octave. "Then why are you trembling?" Holly looked at her own hands and realized, horrified, that he was right. Her fingers were trembling slightly. She closed her fists, trying to hide it, but it was too late. He had already seen. Dylan raised his hand slowly, giving her time to move away if she wanted. But she didn't move away. She couldn't. She was frozen in place, trapped in his gaze, as his fingers lightly touched the knot of her robe at her waist. He didn't undo it. He just ran his fingers over the fabric, feeling the texture, as if memorizing every fiber. And then, with torturous slowness, he moved his hand up the side of her body, without touching her skin, just grazing the robe, until he reached her shoulder. "Are you cold?" he asked, his voice husky, as his fingers played with the edge of the fabric near her collarbone. "No," she whispered. "Then why are you trembling?" he repeated, his eyes fixed on hers, gleaming with an intensity that made her feel as if she were melting. She had no answer. Or rather, she did. But it wasn't an answer she was ready to admit out loud. Dylan let his hand fall back to his side and took a step back, putting distance between them again. But the loss of his warmth was almost physical, as if something had been torn away from her. "Sleep well, Holly," he said, turning toward the couch. Dylan." He stopped but didn't turn completely. He just looked over his shoulder, waiting. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice coming out more vulnerable than intended. Why don't I what?" He turned completely now, his eyes dark and intense. "Why don't I take you in my arms and carry you to that bed? Why don't I take off that robe and discover what you're hiding underneath? Why don't I kiss you until you forget your own name?" Each word was like a forbidden caress, making her body react in ways she didn't know were possible. "I'm not going to touch you," he continued, his voice low and dangerous, "but that doesn't mean I don't imagine what it would be like." And with those words, he walked away, leaving her alone in the middle of the room, her entire body vibrating with a need she didn't know how to name. Holly stood there for a long moment, unable to move, unable to think. Finally, on shaky legs, she walked to the bed and lay down, pulling the satin sheets over her body. On the other side of the room, Dylan was lying on the couch, his back to her, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, could hear his breathing, as irregular as hers. The silence of the suite was deafening, and somehow that distance between them burned more than any touch could have burned, because now she knew the truth. He wanted her, as much as she wanted him, and that revelation was more dangerous than anything else. The honeymoon in Santorini should have been a dream, and it was, but not in the way Holly had imagined. The little white houses with blue domes contrasting against the endless sea, the orange sunsets that painted the sky like living canvases, the narrow streets perfumed with jasmine and bougainvillea. Everything was perfect, romantic, made to measure for couples in love. Except they weren't a couple in love. They were two strangers trapped in a marriage of convenience, navigating a sexual tension that grew with each hour, each look, each shared breath. Dylan was a gentleman, always, attentive, polite, respectful. But there was something in each of his gestures, something subtle, intentional, almost imperceptible, that made Holly question whether all that kindness wasn't, in fact, the cruelest form of torture. On the first morning in Santorini, he woke her with breakfast in bed. He didn't knock on the door, didn't call from the hallway. He simply entered the room with a wooden tray, wearing only beige linen pants and an open white shirt, his hair still tousled from sleep. The golden morning light came through the voile curtains, illuminating the defined muscles of his abdomen whenever he moved. "Good morning," he said, his voice husky and low, placing the tray on the bed beside her. Holly pulled the sheets up to her neck, still drowsy, but fully aware that she was wearing only the thin silk nightgown. "Good morning." He didn't sit down. He stood beside the bed, his eyes traveling over her face with an attention that made her blush. Then slowly he reached out and touched a strand of hair that had fallen across her face. With delicate fingers, he tucked it behind her ear, his knuckles lightly grazing the sensitive skin of her cheek. It was a brief touch, chaste, but the trail of heat it left remained long after he left the room. Later, when they went down to explore the village of Oya, Dylan insisted on walking beside her, and always with his hand resting lightly at the small of her back, a touch of guidance, of protection, of possession. His fingers didn't move, didn't press. They just rested there, firm and warm, radiating heat through the thin fabric of the summer dress she was wearing. Every time they needed to pass through a narrow street or dodge a group of tourists, he guided her with that touch, light but impossible to ignore. And every time he did it, Holly's body reacted. A shiver ran down her spine. Her breathing quickened. Her heart raced. She tried to convince herself it was just a polite gesture, but the way his fingers sometimes spread out, pressing gently against the curve of her back, said otherwise. There was intention there. There was awareness. There was desire contained in every millimeter of that touch. "Is everything okay?" he asked at one point, leaning in to speak close to her ear as they stopped at a craft shop. His warm breath against her skin made her shudder. She closed her eyes for a second, trying to compose herself. "Yes, why?" "You shivered." He didn't move away. He stayed there so close she could feel the heat emanating from his body, could smell him. That mixture of aftershave, sea, and something purely masculine that left her dizzy. It must be the wind. There's no wind today." She turned to face him, and it was a huge mistake. Because now they were face to face, so close their noses almost touched. His grey eyes were fixed on hers, but they quickly dropped to her mouth before returning. "Then it must be something else," she whispered, not knowing where she found the courage to say that. His lips curved into a half smile, dangerous, seductive. Must be. On the third day, they went to a restaurant on the edge of the cliff for dinner. The table was small, intimate, lit only by candles that flickered with the sea breeze. Dylan ordered red wine, a full-bodied Bordeaux that left her lips slightly stained purple. He couldn't stop looking at her mouth. Every time she brought the glass to her lips, every time she spoke, every time she licked her lips to moisten them, his eyes followed every movement with an attention that made her feel as if she were being devoured alive. When the waiter brought dessert, a chocolate cake with raspberry sauce, Dylan picked up the spoon, cut a small piece, and brought it to her mouth. "Try it," he said, his voice deep and enveloping. Holly opened her mouth, and he slid the spoon between her lips slowly, watching every reaction. She closed her eyes, savoring the rich chocolate and the tartness of the raspberry, but what really made her shiver was the intensity of his gaze on her. When she opened her eyes again, he was still watching her, and there was something different in his face, something hungry, wild, contained only by a thin thread of self-control. "Good?" he asked, his voice huskier than before. "Very." He nodded slowly but didn't look away. "You have sauce on the corner of your mouth." Holly brought her hand to her face, but he was faster. He reached his hand across the table and, with his thumb, gently wiped the corner of her lips. The touch was brief, but the way he lingered there, pressing lightly, almost caressing, made her heart stop for a second. And then, keeping his eyes fixed on her, he brought his thumb to his own mouth and licked the sauce. The gesture was so slow, so deliberate, so obscenely sensual that Holly felt heat rising up her neck and flooding her cheeks. She could barely breathe. "You're right," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "It's very good." The next night they walked along the beach at sunset. The sand was soft under their bare feet, and the sound of the waves created a hypnotic melody. Dylan had taken off his shoes and rolled up the hem of his pants, and Holly held her sandals in her hand, letting the hem of her dress flutter in the wind. They walked in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, or at least it should have been. But with each step their arms brushed, an accidental touch, brief, and then another, and another, until finally Dylan reached out and intertwined his fingers with hers. The gesture was so natural, so simple, that Holly almost forgot to breathe. She looked at their joined hands, his large, strong, completely enveloping hers, and felt something contract in her chest. "Are you cold?" he asked, squeezing her fingers lightly. "No." "Then why are you trembling?" She stopped walking and turned to face him. The sun was descending on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and gold. The golden light illuminated Dylan's face, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, his firm lips, his grey eyes that now gleamed with something she couldn't name. "Why do you do this?" she asked, her voice coming out more vulnerable than intended. "Do what?" "This. Touch me as if what, Holly?" He took a step forward, closing the space between them. His free hand rose and lightly touched the side of her face, his thumb caressing her cheekbone with a delicacy that contrasted with the intensity of his gaze. "As if I wanted to really touch you, as if every time I touch you, I need all my willpower not to go further." His words hit her like waves breaking on the sand. "I promised I wouldn't touch you," he continued, his voice low and husky. "But I never promised it would be easy. Because it's not, Holly. Every second with you is torture. Every time you smile, every time you look at me, every time you tremble under my touch, I have to remind myself that I made a promise. What if I release you from that promise?" The words came out before she could think about them. His eyes darkened. The hand holding hers squeezed lightly. "Don't play with me, Holly. Because if you say that again, I won't be able to hold back." Her heart was beating so hard she was certain he could hear it. But before she could respond, he took a step back, releasing her. "It's getting late," he said, his voice tense. "We should go back." And as they walked back to the hotel in silence, Holly realized an unavoidable truth. That distance between them was becoming unbearable. And soon, very soon, something would have to give. The question was, who would break first? The 5th day of the honeymoon dawned with heavy, humid heat. The kind of heat that stuck to the skin and made every movement slower, every breath deeper. Holly woke up alone in the king-size bed, the sheets tangled around her legs, her body covered in a thin layer of sweat. Dylan had already left, probably to run on the beach as he did every morning. She stretched, feeling her muscles protest slightly, and went to the bathroom to take a cold shower. When she returned to the room, wrapped in a fluffy white robe, she stopped abruptly at the door. There was something on the bed, a box, small, wrapped in silver paper with a navy blue satin bow. Holly approached slowly, her heart racing. There was no card, there was no note, but she knew who had left it there. With trembling fingers, she undid the bow and opened the box. Inside, carefully folded, was a nightgown. But it wasn't just any nightgown. It was pure silk, in an ivory tone that shimmered under the morning light. The straps were thin as threads of hair, and the fabric was so delicate it seemed to melt between her fingers. The length would barely reach mid-thigh. And at the top, just below the bust, there was a detail in French lace, delicate, sophisticated, but undeniably provocative. It was the most beautiful and most terrifying piece of clothing Holly had ever seen. She held the nightgown against her body, looking at herself in the mirror. Even over the robe, she could imagine how it would look, how the silk would embrace her curves, how the lace would highlight her silhouette, how the short length would reveal her legs. He chose this. He imagined you wearing this. The thought made her shiver. She should return it, should put it back in the box and pretend she never saw it. But her hands didn't obey. Instead, she found herself removing the robe and sliding the nightgown over her body. The fabric was cool against her heated skin, but it fit perfectly, as if it had been custom-made for her. Holly turned to the mirror and held her breath. She barely recognized herself. The woman in the reflection was sensual, feminine, confident. The silk embraced every curve. The lace highlighted the soft line of her bust, and the short length elongated her legs in a way she'd never noticed before. It wasn't vulgar. It was elegant. But it was impossible to look at that image and not think of seduction. "You look beautiful." Holly spun around so fast she almost tripped. Dylan was standing in the bedroom doorway, still wearing his running clothes, a grey t-shirt clinging to his sweaty body and athletic shorts. His hair was tousled, damp, and there was a sheen on his skin that suggested he'd just arrived. But none of that was what made her feel like she was on fire. It was the way he was looking at her. His grey eyes travelled over every inch of her body, slowly, lingering. There was no rush. There was no shame. He observed her the way a starving man observes a feast, with appreciation, desire, and a hunger that couldn't be satisfied by just looking. He started at the line of her bare shoulders, descended down the thin straps, stopped at the lace detail that moulded her bust, slid down her defined waist, over the curves of her hips, down her exposed thighs, until he reached her delicate ankles. And then, slowly, he came back up, rising along the same path, memorizing every detail, every curve, every millimeter of revealed skin. When his eyes finally met hers again, there was nothing controlled left in his gaze. There was only desire, raw, intense, desperate. "Dylan," she began, but her voice failed. He took a step into the room. Then another. The movements were slow, measured, as if he were forcing himself to go slowly when every fibre of his being screamed to run to her. "I shouldn't have come in," he said, his voice husky and low. "I knocked. You didn't answer. I thought you were still sleeping. I was in the bathroom." He nodded, but didn't look away. He couldn't. "Are you going to wear that nightgown?" The question was simple, but the way he asked it, with his voice loaded with tension as if the answer could kill him or save him, made her realize that nothing about this moment was simple. "So you chose it for me," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I know." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple moving visibly up and down. "I saw it in a shop window yesterday, and I couldn't stop imagining how you'd look in it. And now that you're seeing—" He took another step. Now he was only a meter away. So close she could see the drops of sweat on his temple, could hear his accelerated breathing, could feel the heat emanating from his body. "Now," he said, his voice coming out almost like a growl, "I'm wondering how I'm going to be able to sleep knowing you're on the other side of the room wearing that." Holly's heart raced. "Who said I'm going to wear it to sleep?" His eyes narrowed. "Holly, maybe I'll wear it now." She didn't know where she was getting this courage from. But something inside her had awakened. Something that was tired of waiting, of containing, of pretending she didn't feel what she felt. "You're playing with me," he said, but there was a note of desperation in his voice. "Am I?" He closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He stopped so close their bodies almost touched. She could see every detail of his face, the tense line of his jaw, his parted lips, his eyes darkened by desire. She could feel the heat radiating from him, could hear his irregular breathing, could see the vein pulsing in his neck. "Good night, Holly," he said, his voice coming out hoarse, almost pleading. "Good night," she repeated, confused. "But it's still morning." "I know." He closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. When he opened them again, there was a determination there that made her shiver. "But if I stay here one more second looking at you like this, I'm going to break my promise. And I don't want the first time I touch you to be because I lost control." "Dylan—" "Good night, Holly," he repeated, his voice firmer now but still loaded with tension. And then he turned and left the room, closing the door behind him with a soft click that echoed like thunder. Holly stood there alone, her entire body vibrating with a need she didn't know how to satisfy. She looked at the mirror again, saw the woman in the reflection, flushed, breathing fast, her eyes shining with something she could finally name. Desire. She wanted him, desperately. And for the first time since they'd married, she wondered, how much longer could they maintain that distance? That night, Holly wore the nightgown again, not because she needed to, not because it was comfortable, but because she wanted him to see her, wanted to see that look again, wanted to feel the power she had over him. She came out of the bathroom slowly, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. Dylan was sitting in the armchair near the window, a book in his hands, but she knew he wasn't reading. His eyes had been fixed on the same page for minutes. When she appeared, he looked up and froze. The book fell from his hands, hitting the floor with a dull sound. But he didn't seem to notice. His eyes were glued to her, traveling over every inch of her body with that same intensity from the morning. Holly walked to the bed slowly, feeling the weight of his gaze like a physical caress. She lay down, pulling the sheets up to her waist, leaving the upper part of her body exposed. The silk shimmering under the soft light of the lamp, the lace highlighting every curve. "Good night, Dylan," she said, her voice coming out softer and more provocative than intended. He didn't respond, he couldn't. He was too busy trying to breathe, trying to maintain control, trying not to cross the room and do everything he'd imagined since the moment he saw her in that nightgown. Finally he stood up, his movements stiff, tense. He walked to the couch, lay down with his back to her, and pulled the blanket over his body. But Holly heard it, heard his accelerated breathing, heard the deep, frustrated sigh, heard the creaking of the couch when he moved, restless, and she smiled in the dark, because now she knew. He was as close to breaking as she was, and that made her even hotter than any touch could have. The 8th day of the honeymoon brought a change in plans. Dylan had booked a private boat tour to explore the islands around Santorini. Holly woke to the soft sound of waves and the smell of fresh coffee coming from the balcony. When she opened her eyes, he was already dressed, beige shorts, a light white linen shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, sunglasses hanging from the neckline of his shirt. "Good morning," he said, bringing a cup of coffee to her. "We have to leave in an hour. The boat is waiting for us at the port." Holly sat up in bed, still drowsy, and accepted the cup. Their fingers touched briefly in the transfer, and that familiar shock ran through her arm. She'd given up trying to understand why every touch from him, even the most innocent, affected her so much. "Thank you," she murmured, bringing the cup to her lips. He stayed there for a moment, watching her. There was something different in his gaze today, something softer, more vulnerable, as if the previous night, when she wore the nightgown and provoked him without saying a word, had cracked something in his armor. "Holly," he began, his voice hesitant. "About yesterday." "It's okay," she interrupted quickly, feeling the blush rise up her neck. "You don't need to explain anything." "I want to." He sat on the edge of the bed, maintaining a respectful distance, but close enough for her to feel the weight of his presence. "I don't want you to think that I don't want—" The words died on his lips. He ran his hand through his hair, frustrated, searching for the right words. "I know what you want," Holly said softly. "And I know what I want. But maybe it's not the right time yet." His eyes met hers, and there was gratitude there, and relief, and something more. A silent promise that when the right time came, there would be no more barriers between them. The boat was beautiful. It had a private white wooden yacht, with blue sails that fluttered in the wind. The captain was a Greek gentleman with a wide smile, who barely spoke English, but whose kindness transcended any language barrier. He guided them aboard, pointed out the life jackets and cushioned seats at the bow, and then retreated to the helm, leaving them alone. The sea was calm, with only small waves that made the boat rock gently. The sky was crystalline blue without a single cloud, and the sun shone intensely, warming their skin and creating golden reflections on the water. Holly was standing at the side of the boat, watching the coast of Santorini slowly recede, when the yacht gave an unexpected lurch. She lost her balance, her arms instinctively opening to try to grab onto something, but before she could fall, firm hands grabbed her waist. Dylan pulled her against his chest with a quick, precise movement. Her body fit perfectly into his, her back against his defined chest, their hips aligned, their legs almost intertwined. It was as if they'd been made to fit together that way. "Careful," he murmured near her ear, his warm breath against the sensitive skin of her neck. Holly held her breath. His hands were still on her waist, his fingers splayed against the thin fabric of the summer dress she was wearing. She could feel the heat of them through the fabric, could feel the firm, almost possessive pressure with which he held her. "I'm fine," she managed to say, but her voice came out shaky. "Are you sure?" He didn't let go. If anything, his fingers tightened a bit more, pressing lightly against the curve of her waist as if testing, memorizing, appreciating. Yes, but she didn't pull away, and he didn't let go. They stayed like that for a moment that seemed to stretch forever. Their bodies pressed together, their breathing synchronized, the gentle rocking of the boat making them sway together. Holly could feel his heart beating against her back, could feel the heat emanating from his body, could feel something firm pressing lightly against the small of her back. He wanted her, and his body wasn't hiding it. "Dylan," she whispered, not knowing exactly what she wanted to say. He finally released her, but the movement was slow, reluctant. His fingers slid along the side of her waist before pulling away completely, leaving a trail of heat in their path. "Sorry," he said, his voice husky. "I didn't mean to. I just wanted to make sure you were safe." "I know." She turned to face him, and it was a huge mistake, because now she could see his face, his darkened eyes, his dilated pupils, his parted lips, his accelerated breathing. He was as affected as she was. "You should sit down," he said, but didn't move. He stood there, looking at her as if waging an internal war. "And you?" "I'm going to stay here for another minute." She understood. He needed time to compose himself, to control the physical reaction his body had betrayed. So she just nodded and walked to the seats at the bow, feeling his eyes burning on her back with every step. The tour continued for hours. They stopped at small deserted beaches, swam in crystal-clear waters, explored caves hidden in the cliffs. Dylan was attentive, always offering his hand to help her climb the rocks, always positioning himself behind her to make sure she didn't fall, always touching her in small, apparently innocent ways that left her breathless. But it was in the late afternoon, when they were returning to the port, that something changed. The wind had picked up, bringing a cooler breeze that made Holly's body shiver. She was sitting at the bow, hugging her knees, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Dylan approached silently and sat beside her. Without saying anything, he took off the linen shirt he was wearing and placed it over her shoulders. "You're going to be cold," she protested, but her hands were already pulling the fabric closer, wrapping herself in the residual warmth and his scent. "I'm fine." He sat closer until their shoulders touched. "You're shivering. It's just the wind." "Liar." But there was a smile in his voice. They stayed silent for a while, just watching the sun descend on the horizon. It was peaceful, intimate, and frighteningly natural. Then Dylan moved, changing position. He stretched out his arm and placed it around her shoulders, gently pulling her against his chest. Holly should have protested, should have pulled away. But instead she snuggled against him, fitting her head into the hollow between his shoulder and neck. It was comfortable, warm. Right. Better? He asked, his voice reverberating against her ear. Yes. He tightened the embrace slightly, his fingers drawing lazy circles on her shoulder. It wasn't sexual, it wasn't provocative. It was just affection, pure and simple. And somehow that was more dangerous than all the provocative touches he'd given before, because that felt real. "Holly," he said after a long silence, his voice low and serious, "I need to tell you something." She lifted her head to look at him, her heart racing. "What?" He hesitated, his eyes searching hers as if looking for courage. I didn't expect this to be like this." "Like what?" "Like this. Real." He ran his free hand through his hair, frustrated. "When I accepted this marriage, I thought it would just be an arrangement. Mutual convenience, no complications, no feelings. But then I saw you at the altar and, she encouraged, barely able to breathe. And I realized I had completely fooled myself." He held her face with both hands, the touch delicate but firm. "You're not just a convenience, Holly. You're becoming everything." The words hit her like waves breaking against rocks. She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to process what she was feeling, so she did the only thing that made sense. She leaned forward, closing the distance between them, and pressed her lips against his. The kiss was different from the ones they'd shared at the altar. It was slower, deeper, more real. There were no witnesses. There was no obligation. It was just the two of them in the middle of the sea, while the sun set behind them. Dylan responded immediately, his arms enveloping her completely, pulling her closer until there was no space between their bodies. His mouth moved against hers with a contained hunger, but also with a tenderness that made her melt. When they finally separated, both were breathless. Dylan rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed, as if trying to memorize that moment. "Are we going to regret this?" she whispered. "I don't know." He opened his eyes, and what she saw there made her shiver. "But I know I'll regret it more if I don't try." And as the boat carried them back to the port, Holly realized there was no going back now. They had crossed an invisible line, and now there was no more pretending this was just a marriage of convenience. Because for her, and she suspected for him too, it had already become much, much more. The 10th day of the honeymoon arrived with an unspoken promise floating in the air. Something had changed after the kiss on the boat. It wasn't just the physical tension growing between them. It was something deeper, more frightening. An emotional intimacy that neither of them knew how to handle. Dylan was quieter than usual during breakfast. His eyes met hers more frequently, lingered longer, carried more weight. And every time that happened, Holly felt her heart race and her hands tremble slightly. "There's a secluded beach a few miles from here," he said suddenly, pushing his empty plate aside. "Almost no one goes there. I thought maybe you'd like to watch the sunset from there today." "Just the two of us?" The words came out before she could think about them. His lips curved into a half smile. "Just the two of us." There was an implicit promise in those words, and both knew it. They arrived at the beach in the middle of the afternoon. It was exactly as Dylan had described, isolated, untouched, perfect. The sand was white and soft as sugar, and the sea had so many shades of blue that Holly lost count. There was no one for miles, just them, the sound of the waves and the occasional cry of seagulls flying overhead. Dylan spread a large towel on the sand and sat down, taking off his shirt in one fluid motion that made Holly forget how to breathe. His body was a work of art, defined but not excessive muscles, skin bronzed by the Greek sun, a line of dark hair descending from his abdomen and disappearing at the waistband of his shorts. She quickly looked away, feeling the heat rise up her neck. "Are you going in the water?" he asked, already standing, extending his hand to her. Holly accepted his hand and let him pull her up. "I think so." They walked to the water's edge, where the waves lapped at the sand in a hypnotic rhythm. The water was surprisingly warm, and Holly allowed herself to relax, letting the waves hit against her legs as she walked deeper and deeper. Dylan was beside her, always beside her, and when a bigger wave came, he instinctively held her by the waist to steady her. But this time, He didn't let go. His fingers remained there, firm against her skin, and Holly felt every nerve ending in her body awaken. She turned to face him, and what she saw in his eyes made her forget where she was. There was hunger there, but there was also tenderness, desire, but there was also fear, as if he were on the edge of a precipice and didn't know whether to jump or step back. "Holly," he began, his voice husky, "I need to know something." "What? Do you think I'm dangerous?" The question caught her off guard. She blinked, trying to process what he was asking. "Dangerous?" "Yes." He took a step closer, his body blocking the sun, creating a shadow over her. "All those things they said about me. Cold, incapable. Do you believe them?" Holly looked into his eyes and saw vulnerability there. He really wanted to know, needed to know. "No," she said firmly. "I don't believe any of that." "Then what do you believe?" She took a deep breath, gathering courage. "I believe you're the most intense man I've ever met. I believe that every look from you challenges me, every touch from you unsettles me. And yes, that's dangerous, but not in the way they said." His eyes darkened. "Dangerous how?" "Dangerous because you make me feel things I swore I'd never feel. Dangerous because you're breaking down all the barriers I built around my heart. Dangerous because—" She hesitated, but then decided to be completely honest. "Because I'm starting to want this to be real." The silence that followed was deafening. Only the sound of waves breaking around them. Then Dylan raised his hand and touched her face. It wasn't a brief or casual touch. It was slow, deliberate, loaded with intention. His fingers slid along the side of her face, tracing the line of her jaw with a delicacy that contrasted with the intensity of his gaze. "What if I tell you," he murmured, his eyes fixed on her lips, "that for me it's already real?" Holly's heart stopped, or raced. She wasn't sure. All she knew was that she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but look at him and feel like she was burning from the inside. "Dylan, I want you, Holly." The words came out like a confession torn by force. "I've wanted you since the moment I saw you at the altar, and every day that passes, every moment with you, that desire only grows. But it's not just physical. It's more than that. Much more." He took another step, completely closing the space between them. Their bodies now touched, chest against chest, hip against hip, leg against leg. The seawater lapped around their waists, but neither seemed to notice. "I want to kiss you," he continued, his voice low and husky. "I want to touch you. I want to make you mine in every possible way. But more than all of that, I want you to know that when I touch you, when I kiss you, when I finally make you mine, it won't be just a physical act. It will be a promise, a surrender, a commitment." Holly couldn't speak. Tears burned in her eyes, but she held them back. "And what do you want from me?" "Everything." The answer was immediate, without hesitation. "I want everything from you. Your body, your heart, your soul. I want you to be my wife for real, not on paper, not for convenience, but for real." His hand moved up to her hair, his fingers intertwining in the damp strands, holding her firmly, but without brutality. He tilted his head, bringing his lips close to hers, so close she could feel his warm breath against her mouth, so close that if she moved a millimeter, they would kiss. But he stopped there, waiting, giving her the chance to pull back, to say no, to put an end to this before it went too far. "Tell me," he whispered against her lips. "Tell me you want me too. Tell me this isn't just me going crazy alone." "It's not just you." The words came out like a sigh. "I want you too. I want this to be real too." Something changed in his eyes. A decision being made, a line being crossed. He tilted his head more, his lips lightly grazing hers. It wasn't quite a kiss, it was just a promise of a kiss, a taste of what was to come. And then, when Holly thought it would finally happen, that he would finally really kiss her, he stopped. "Not here," he said, his voice rough, fighting against every instinct. "Not like this." "Why?" Frustration and desire colored her voice. "Because when I kiss you again, when I make you mine, it will be in a place where I can have you completely, where there's no rush, where there are no interruptions." He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed, breathing deeply as if trying to control himself. You deserve more than a stolen moment on the beach. What if I don't care? He laughed, a low, husky sound loaded with repressed desire. I care. I want to do this right, Holly. I want our first time to be perfect, because it will be the first of many, and I want you to remember it forever. He pulled away then, putting physical distance between them, because it was the only way to maintain control. His hands trembled slightly, revealing the cost of that restraint. Let's go back, he said, but it didn't sound like a suggestion. It sounded like a necessity. They walked back along the beach in silence, but it was a different silence, loaded, heavy, full of things unspoken but deeply felt. When they reached the towel, Dylan grabbed his shirt and put it on quickly, as if he needed a physical barrier between them. Holly did the same, putting the light dress on over her bikini. The sunset began then, a spectacle of oranges, pinks, purples, and golds spreading across the sky like spilled paint. It was beautiful, romantic, perfect. They sat side by side on the sand, watching the sun slowly descend on the horizon. Dylan took her hand, intertwining their fingers, and brought it to his lips, placing a soft kiss on her knuckles. Soon, he promised, his eyes fixed on the horizon, but the grip on her hand saying everything. Very soon. And Holly realized that the wait, this sweet and agonizing torture, was coming to an end. Soon there would be no more barriers between them. Soon they would truly be one. And that certainty made her tremble more than any touch ever had. The 12th day of the honeymoon started differently. Holly woke up alone as always, but this time there was a folded note on the pillow beside hers. Had to take care of something at the hotel. I'll be back soon. Order whatever you want for breakfast. D. The handwriting was firm, masculine, and for some reason those few words made her smile. She stretched, ordered breakfast on the balcony, and spent the morning reading a book, enjoying the ocean breeze and the gentle sun. But as the hours passed and Dylan didn't return, an uneasiness began to grow in her chest. It was almost 2 in the afternoon when he finally came back, and he wasn't alone. Holly heard voices in the hallway before the door even opened. Dylan's deep voice, tense and formal, and another voice, feminine, soft, far too intimate. When the door opened, Holly instinctively stood up from her chair on the balcony. Dylan entered first, and his gaze met hers immediately. There was something in his eyes, a silent explanation, an anticipated apology. And then she understood why. A woman walked in behind him, tall, elegant, beautiful in a way that seemed almost unreal. Perfectly wavy blonde hair falling over her shoulders, clear blue eyes, a slender body dressed in a beige linen set that probably cost more than Holly's salary for 6 months. And the way she moved, confident, familiar, made it clear she knew Dylan. Very well. Holly, Dylan said, his voice controlled but tense. This is Vanessa Ashford. Vanessa, my wife, Holly. The word wife came out with deliberate emphasis, almost possessive. Vanessa smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. So, you're the famous Holly. Dylan has told me so much about you. There was something about the way she said it, as if they shared secrets, as if they had intimacy, that made Holly's stomach turn. Vanessa was staying at the same hotel, Dylan explained, keeping his distance from both women. We ran into each other in the lobby. She was leaving and wanted to say goodbye. Say goodbye? Holly repeated, forcing a polite smile she didn't feel. Yes, Dylan and I are old friends. Vanessa took a step forward, moving closer to Dylan in a way that was too intimate, too casual. She placed her hand on his arm, a brief touch, but loaded with familiarity. So we have history, don't we, Dylan? Holly's eyes fixed on that hand, on those pale, delicate fingers on his tanned arm, and something boiled inside her, something primitive, possessive, furious. Dylan subtly pulled away, removing his arm from Vanessa's reach. That was a long time ago. Not that long. Vanessa laughed, a light, musical sound, but with an edge of provocation. Well, I don't want to interrupt your honeymoon. I just wanted to see how you were doing, Dylan, and meet the woman who finally managed to tie you down. Tie down, as if he were a wild beast that needed to be tamed. Holly clenched her fists at her sides, her nails digging into her palms, but she kept the polite smile on her face. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Vanessa." "The pleasure was mine." Vanessa turned to Dylan once more, and then did something that made Holly's blood boil. She leaned in and placed a kiss on his cheek. Lingering, intimate. "Take care, Dylan. And if you need anything, you know where to find me." And with one last poisonous smile in Holly's direction, she left. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Dylan closed the door and turned to Holly. "I can explain—" "Who is she?" Holly's voice came out colder than she intended. "I told you, an old friend." "Don't treat me like an idiot, Dylan." She crossed her arms over her chest, her entire body tense. "She touched you like she had the right to. She kissed you like you were close. So tell me the truth, who is she?" He sighed, running his hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she'd already learned to recognize. "She's my ex-fiancée." The words hit her like a punch to the stomach. "Your ex-fiancée?" "Yes, we broke up 2 years ago. It was complicated." "Complicated?" Holly laughed, but there was no humor in it. "And you didn't think it was relevant to tell me that your ex-fiancée was staying at the same hotel as us during our honeymoon?" "I didn't know she was here." He took a step forward, his hands extended in a placating gesture. "It was a coincidence. I ran into her in the lobby this morning when I went to handle something with the front desk. She stopped me. I was polite, that's all." "Polite?" Holly repeated the word as if it were poisonous. "She touched you, Dylan. Like she still had the right to, like you were still hers." "But I'm not." He closed the distance between them in 3 long strides, stopping directly in front of her. "I'm not hers, I never really was. And now I'm yours." "Am I?" Her voice came out shaky, vulnerable. Because the way she talked, the way she looked at you, it didn't seem like she believed that. His eyes narrowed. "You're jealous." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. "What if I am?" Holly lifted her chin defiantly. "She touched you like she still had the right to, like I didn't exist." Something changed in Dylan's face. The frustration gave way to something darker, more intense, more dangerous. "You didn't like it," he said, his voice low, taking another step forward. Now they were so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "You didn't like seeing her touch me." "No." There was no point in denying it. "Good." He tilted his head, his eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her tremble. "Because I hated every second of it. I hated her touch. I hated having to be polite when all I wanted was to come running back here. To you." "Dylan!" "You're my wife, Holly." He took another step, and now she was trapped between him and the wall behind her. His hands pressed against the wall on either side of her face, caging her in. "Mine." Not hers. Never hers. It was always you. Her breathing quickened. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "You want me to prove it to you?" He leaned in, his lips so close to hers it was almost a kiss. "You want me to show you who's the only woman I want? The only woman I think about? The only woman who drives me crazy with desire?" "Yes," she whispered before she could think better of it, and that was all he needed to hear. Dylan captured her lips in a kiss that had nothing gentle about it. It was pure hunger. Repressed desire finally unleashed. Possession, claim, promise. His hands left the wall and grabbed her face, tilting her at the perfect angle to deepen the kiss. His mouth moved against hers with an urgency that stole all the air from her lungs. It was dominant but not brutal. It was demanding but not careless. Holly surrendered completely. Her hands moved up his arms, over his shoulders, until they tangled in the hair at the nape of his neck, pulling him closer, deeper. He growled low, a primitive sound that came from deep in his throat, and pressed his body completely against hers. There was no space between them now, none, just heat, desire, and a desperate need that grew with each second. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless. Dylan rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed, his chest rising and falling rapidly. "She means nothing," he said, his voice hoarse and rough. "Absolutely nothing. You're everything." "Do you understand everything?" Holly nodded, unable to speak. Say it, he demanded, opening his eyes to meet hers. Say you understand. Say you believe me. I believe you, she whispered. I believe you. He kissed her again, softer this time, but no less intense. It was a kiss of promise, of commitment, of truth, and when he finally pulled away, there was something different in his eyes. A decision made, a line being crossed. We're not waiting anymore, he said, his voice firm. No more restraint, no more hesitation. I want you, Holly, and I'm going to have you today, now. Her heart raced. Dylan, tell me you want me too, he asked, his hands sliding down the side of her body, along her waist, over her hips. Tell me you're ready. She looked into his eyes and saw everything she needed to see. Desire, but also love. Passion, but also tenderness. Possession, but also devotion. I want you, she said firmly. I'm ready. And with those words, everything changed. Dylan held Holly's face between his hands, his thumbs caressing her flushed cheeks, while his grey eyes studied her with an intensity that made her tremble. There was no rush in his movements, just a silent reverence, as if he were memorizing every detail of that moment, the way the afternoon light filtered through the curtains and illuminated her face, the way her lips were still slightly swollen from the kiss they'd shared, the gleam of desire and vulnerability in her eyes. Are you sure? He asked, his voice hoarse but filled with care. Because if you tell me now that you want to stop, I'll stop. No hard feelings, no pressure. Holly placed her hands over his, intertwining their fingers. I'm sure, more sure than I've ever been about anything. Something ignited in his eyes, a flame that had been contained for so long it now threatened to consume them both. But even so, he moved slowly, because this wasn't just about desire. It was about respect, about making this moment as special as she deserved. He kissed her again, but this time it was different, slower, deeper, more intimate. It was a kiss that spoke of promises and futures, of surrenders and yielding. His hands moved from her face to her shoulders, sliding down the thin straps of the summer dress she wore. May I? He whispered against her lips. Yes. With deliberate and careful movements, he slid the straps down her shoulders, revealing inch by inch of skin. His eyes followed the path of his hands, admiring, appreciating, revering. The dress slipped down her body and fell to the floor in a whisper of fabric. Holly stood there, vulnerable, wearing only delicate white lace lingerie. But the way Dylan looked at her, with pure admiration, without judgment, without haste, made any insecurity disappear. You're beautiful, he said, and it wasn't just a throwaway line. It was a truth declared with absolute conviction. So beautiful that sometimes it hurts to look at you. His hands traced the line of her arms, moved up her shoulders, glided over her collarbone, drawing each contour as if he were creating a map of her skin. And then, with his eyes fixed on hers, he slowly knelt down. Holly held her breath as his hands moved down her waist, over her hips, along her thighs. He placed a soft kiss on her abdomen, then another just below her navel, then another on the curve of her hip. Each touch was pure worship. Dylan! Her voice came out shaky. He looked up, still on his knees before her, and what she saw there made her feel like she was melting. There was desire, yes, but there was also something more, something that seemed dangerously close to love. I want to do this right, he said, rising slowly. I want you to feel every touch, every kiss. I want you to know how much you're desired, how precious you are. He picked her up easily, making her wrap her legs around his waist. Holly gasped at the sensation of his body so close, so firm, so warm against hers. He walked to the bed and laid her down carefully, as if she were made of something fragile and precious. Then, keeping his eyes fixed on her, he began to remove his own clothes. First the shirt, unbuttoned with a purposeful slowness that made her want to scream with frustration and anticipation. The fabric slid over his broad shoulders, revealing his defined torso, tanned skin, the line of hair that ran down his abdomen. Holly couldn't look away. Every muscle, every line, every shadow was pure perfection. He removed his pants next, left only in his underwear, and even through the fabric she could see how much he wanted her. But he didn't rush. He just lay down beside her on the bed, propping himself up on one elbow, and began to explore her body with his hands. His fingers traced the line of her neck, descended along her collarbone, glided down the side of her body, always gentle, always reverent, always attentive to each of her reactions. When he reached the curve of her waist, he stopped, his eyes seeking permission in hers. "May I remove this?" he asked, his fingers playing with the edge of her lace lingerie. "Please." With skilled but careful hands, he removed the last barriers between them, and then she was completely exposed before him, completely vulnerable, completely his. Dylan spent a long moment just looking, his eyes traveling over every curve, every line, every inch of revealed skin. And then he began to kiss her. Started with her lips, then moved down her neck, her collarbone, the valley between her breasts, her abdomen, her hips. Each kiss was a declaration. Each touch was a promise. Each shared sigh was a surrender. Holly arched her body, her fingers tangling in his hair, pulling him back up until their faces were aligned again. "I need you," she whispered. "Now. Please." He nodded, kissing her deeply as he positioned himself between her legs. But even now, when desire threatened to consume them, he was careful, slow, attentive. "Tell me if it hurts," he whispered against her lips. "Tell me if you want me to stop." "Don't stop," she answered, her eyes fixed on his. "Don't ever stop." And then they became one. The moment was intense, a mixture of pleasure, pressure, and a connection so deep that Holly felt tears burning in her eyes. Dylan stopped immediately, his face tense with restraint. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice rough. "Yes. Yes. I'm more than okay. It's intense. For me, too." He rested his forehead against hers, breathing deeply, giving her time to adjust. "You feel perfect. So perfect I can hardly believe this is real." She moved her hips experimentally, and they both moaned low at the sensation. That was all he needed. He began to move, slow at first, establishing a rhythm that was more dance than physical act. It was synchronized, intimate, connected. Their bodies moved together as if they'd been made for this. Each movement was a silent conversation. Each sigh was a response. Each touch was both a question and an affirmation. Dylan supported his weight on his arms so he could look into her eyes as they moved together. There was no darkness, no shame. Just the two of them, completely exposed, completely vulnerable, completely surrendered. "You're everything," he whispered, kissing her between words. "Everything I've always wanted and never knew I needed." Holly held his face between her hands, forcing him to maintain eye contact. "I love you," she said, and the words came out before she could think about them. But as soon as they were spoken, she knew they were true. "I love you, Dylan." Something broke in his eyes. All the restraint, all the control he'd maintained, shattered. He kissed her with renewed passion, the movements deepening, intensifying, but never losing the tenderness that characterized them. "I love you too," he responded, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I love you so much that sometimes I don't know how to contain it. You're my life, Holly, my reason, my everything." They moved together, their quickened breaths mingling, their bodies merging, their souls intertwining. The tension built between them, a rope being stretched tighter and tighter to the breaking point. When they finally reached the peak, it was together. A wave of pleasure so intense that Holly felt like she was falling apart and being rebuilt at the same time. Dylan held her tight, his face buried in the curve of her neck, whispering her name like a prayer. They stayed like that for a long moment, bodies intertwined, hearts beating in sync, breaths slowly calming. Dylan rolled to the side, pulling her with him, so she was nestled against his chest. He kissed her forehead, then the tip of her nose, then her lips, soft, affectionate kisses, full of tenderness. "You're my home," he whispered, his fingers drawing lazy patterns on her back. "Wherever you are is where I belong." Holly lifted her face to look at him, and what she saw in his eyes made her feel like she was floating. Love, pure and true. "And you're mine," she answered, nestling deeper into his embrace. They fell asleep like that, intertwined, connected, completely each other's. And for the first time since they'd married, there were no more barriers, no more distance, no more fear. Just love. Deep, true, and eternal. The following days were perfect. Completely, intensely perfect. Holly and Dylan existed in a bubble of intimacy and mutual discovery. Each morning began with lazy kisses and exploring hands. Each afternoon was filled with laughter, deep conversations, and constant touches. Each night ended with them tangled in each other, whispering promises and declarations of love. Holly had never been so happy, had never felt so complete, so seen, so loved. But happiness, she would discover, can be a fragile thing. On the 18th day of the honeymoon, Holly was alone in the suite while Dylan had gone out to buy special coffee from a cafe she'd mentioned wanting to try. She was on the balcony, wearing only the silk nightgown he loved so much, reading a book and savoring the ocean breeze. Her phone buzzed on the side table, a message from an unknown number. Holly frowned and opened it. What she saw made her feel like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. It was a photo of Dylan and Vanessa, together, too close. Her hand on his arm, smiles on their faces, and the caption below, "Some men never change. Do you really think you're special?" Holly's hands trembled. She zoomed in on the photo, trying to understand. When was this taken? Where? Why? Another message arrived. This time it was a screenshot of a conversation, supposedly between Dylan and Vanessa. Vanessa, "It was good seeing you today. I missed us." Dylan, "Me too." Vanessa, "Does she know about us, about what we had?" Dylan, "No, and it's better that way." Holly felt nausea rising in her throat. No, this couldn't be real. Dylan wouldn't do this. He wouldn't lie. He wouldn't betray her. Not after everything they'd shared. But the doubt, small, poisonous, insidious, began to grow. Another message arrived. This time it was a short video. Dylan and Vanessa in some kind of cafe. She was laughing at something he'd said. She touched his arm. He didn't pull away immediately. The phone slipped from Holly's hands and fell to the floor with a muffled sound. Tears began burning in her eyes, but she held them back. She took a deep breath, trying to think rationally. This could be manipulated. Could be taken out of context, could be... But the voice of doubt was louder. What if it's true? What if he still loves her? What if you were just a distraction, a convenience? When Dylan returned half an hour later, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a wide smile on his face, he found Holly sitting on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, her suitcase beside her. The smile disappeared instantly. "Holly? What happened?" She couldn't look at him. "I need time." "Time? Time for what?" He set the cups aside and approached quickly, kneeling in front of her. "What's wrong, tell me." "You saw Vanessa again?" It wasn't a question, his face paled. Yes, I ran into her yesterday when I went out to buy that book you wanted. It was a chance encounter at... You didn't tell me. Because it wasn't important. He held her hands, but Holly pulled them back. "Holly, it was literally 2 minutes. She stopped me on the street. We exchanged half a dozen polite words and I left. She sent me messages." Holly grabbed her phone and showed him. "Photos. Conversations. You said you missed her, Dylan. You said it was better if I didn't know about you two." Dylan took the phone, his eyes quickly scanning the messages, his jaw clenched, a vein pulsing in his neck. "This is fake," he said firmly. "Holly, this is completely fake. I never sent these messages. Look at the dates. Look at the times. I was with you at those moments." Holly wanted to believe, desperately, but the poison of doubt had already seeped in too deep. "How can I be sure?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "How do I know you're not just saying what I want to hear?" The pain that crossed his face was almost physical. "Because I love you. Because I would never lie to you. Because everything we shared, every word, every touch, every promise was real." She said you still love her. The tears finally began to fall, tracing hot trails down her cheeks. She said I'm just temporary. Dylan stood up abruptly, running his hands over his face in frustration. "She's lying. She's trying to destroy us because she can't accept that I've moved on." Holly, you have to believe me. I want to believe. She stood up too, hugging herself. But I also need space to think, to process all of this. No. He took a step forward, his eyes shining with something close to desperation. Don't do this. Don't pull away from me. Don't let her win. Don't let her destroy what we've built. I just need time. Her voice came out louder than she intended. Please, Dylan, I need to think. The silence that followed was devastating. Dylan closed his eyes, breathing deeply, trying to control himself. When he opened them again, there were tears there, something Holly had never seen before. How much time do you need? I don't know. A few days. A week, maybe. He nodded slowly, swallowing hard. Okay. If that's what you need, I'll respect it. But Holly... He took a step forward, holding her face between his hands, forcing her to look into his eyes. I swear on everything that's sacred that these messages are fake. I swear I would never betray you. You're everything to me. Everything. Holly wanted to say something, wanted to comfort him, but the words wouldn't come. He kissed her forehead, a long, lingering kiss, full of silent desperation, and then pulled away. I'll stay in the room next door, he said, his voice hoarse. If you need me, I'll be there, always. And then he left, taking all the light and warmth from the room with him. The following days were torture. Holly locked herself in the suite, ignoring Dylan's gentle knocks on the door, ignoring his messages asking them to talk, ignoring the plates of food he left outside with handwritten notes. Please eat something. I love you. That doesn't change. I'll wait for you as long as it takes. Each word shattered her a little more, because deep down she knew the truth. She knew Dylan wouldn't lie, knew those messages were fake, knew Vanessa was manipulating everything, but the fear, that deep, primitive fear of not being enough, of being abandoned, of having her heart broken, paralyzed her. On the fourth night, Holly was lying in bed, unable to sleep, when she heard something that made her freeze. Sobs from the other side of the wall. Dylan was crying. She had never heard him cry. Not once. But now, through the thin walls, she could hear the muffled sounds of a man completely shattered. Holly, he whispered, and even through the wall, she could hear the pain in his voice. Please, please come back to me. Something broke inside her. Holly got up from the bed, trembling, tears streaming down her face. She walked to the door but stopped with her hand on the handle. What am I doing? Why am I letting fear destroy the best thing that's ever happened to me? But still she didn't open the door. Not that night, because sometimes fear is stronger than love. And that, she would discover, was the saddest thing of all. The fifth day of separation dawned grey and heavy. Holly woke up with swollen eyes from crying so much, her body aching from so much tension, her heart broken from so much suffering. She had spent the last few days trapped in a vicious cycle of doubt and regret, unable to find the courage to take the step she knew was necessary. But that morning, something was different. She picked up her phone and, for the first time since receiving those messages, analyzed everything with a clear mind. The dates didn't match, the times were impossible. The way the conversations were written didn't sound like Dylan. It was all manipulation. Lies carefully constructed to destroy the trust they had built, and she had fallen right into the trap. Holly covered her face with her hands, sobbing. What have I done? What have I done to us? She got up quickly, not even bothering to change out of her nightgown into something more appropriate. She needed to see him, needed to ask for forgiveness, needed to fix what she'd broken. Holly opened the suite door and almost tripped over something. Flowers, dozens of them. Red roses, white lilies, pink tulips, all carefully arranged in vases lining the hallway. And between each arrangement, there were small handwritten notes. She picked up the first one with trembling fingers. Day 1, I'm waiting for you. The second, Day 2, I still love you. The third, Day 3, my heart is yours. It always was. It always will be. The fourth, Day 4, I'm not giving up on us. And the fifth, the most recent, Day 5. Please come back to me. I can't breathe without you. Tears were falling freely now, staining the notes in her hands. Holly walked through the hallway of flowers until she reached the door next to hers. She didn't knock, didn't announce her presence, just opened it. The scene she found completely shattered her. Dylan was on the balcony, hunched over the railing, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He wore only sweatpants, his bare torso revealing the tension in every muscle. His hair was completely disheveled, as if he'd run his hands through it 1,000 times. And when she got closer, she could see tears falling freely down his face, glistening in the pale morning light. He was completely broken. "Dylan," she whispered. He froze, but didn't turn around, as if he was afraid that if he looked, she would disappear. "If you came to tell me it's over," he said, his voice hoarse and broken. "I don't know if I can handle hearing it." Holly moved closer until she was directly behind him. With trembling hands, she touched his back. The skin was cold, tense. He shuddered at the contact, but still didn't turn around. "I didn't come to say it's over," she said, her voice also broken. "I came to ask for forgiveness." Now he turned around. His face was devastated. Red eyes, wet cheeks, an expression of pain so deep it was almost unbearable to see. "Forgiveness for what?" he asked, confused. "For doubting you. For letting fear speak louder than love. For hurting you when you only gave me reasons to trust." Tears were flowing uncontrollably now. "I looked at the messages again, really looked, and I saw everything you tried to tell me. The inconsistencies, the impossibilities, the lies. It was all fake, and I knew it. Deep down I always knew, but I let my fear of not being enough blind me." Dylan closed his eyes, new tears streaming down. "You think you're not enough? Holly, you're everything. You're more than I ever dreamed of having. You're the reason I wake up every morning. You're the reason I breathe. I know that now." She moved closer, holding his face with both hands, forcing him to look into her eyes. "And I'm sorry. I'm sorry for doubting. I'm sorry for leaving you alone when you needed me. I'm sorry for letting her win, even if only for a few days." "You don't need to apologize," he said, covering her hands with his. "You were scared. You were processing. I understand." "No." She shook her head firmly. "I do need to. Because you deserve it. You deserve trust. You deserve certainty. You deserve someone who fights for you, not someone who runs at the first sign of trouble." Dylan pulled her into his arms, hugging her so tightly she could barely breathe. But she didn't care. She clung to him with the same intensity, burying her face in his chest, feeling his heart beating strong and fast against her cheek. "I love you," she whispered against his skin. "I love you so much it scares me. I love you so much I don't know how to live without you. You're the man I choose today, tomorrow, always." He held her face, tilting her back so he could look into her eyes. "Are you sure? Absolutely sure? Because, Holly, if you come back, if you give me another chance, I'm never letting you go again. You'll be mine forever, completely, irrevocably. I want to be yours forever," she said firmly. "And I want you to be mine, not because of a contract, not for convenience, but because of love, because of choice, because of commitment." Dylan kissed her. It was a desperate, hungry kiss, full of all the days of separation and suffering. But it was also a kiss of new beginnings, of forgiveness, of renewed promise. His hands were everywhere, in her hair, on her face, on her back, as if he needed to confirm she was real, that she had come back. When they finally pulled apart, they were both crying and laughing at the same time. "Never again," he said, resting his forehead against hers. "Never again let anything separate us. No matter what happens, no matter who tries to destroy us, we face it together. Promise?" "Promise." He picked her up, making her wrap her legs around his waist, and walked back inside the room. He laid her on the bed, carefully covering her body with his, but without rushing. Just needing to feel her, touch her, confirm she was there. "I almost died these past few days," he confessed, kissing her neck, her jaw, her cheek. "Every hour without you was torture. Every night alone was hell. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't think about anything but you." "I suffered too," she admitted, her fingers tangling in his hair. "Every minute away from you was agony, but I was trapped in my own fear, unable to take the step my heart knew was right. You took that step today, He kissed her lips softly. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life showing you that you made the right choice." They made love again that morning, but it was different this time. It was deeper, more meaningful, because now they knew the cost of almost losing each other. They knew the pain of separation, and that made each touch more precious, each kiss more true, each moment more sacred. There was no rush, just reverence, just worship. Just two hearts that had been shattered and were now being rebuilt, stronger than before. When they finally lay intertwined, exhausted but complete, Dylan held Holly against his chest, kissing her hair, whispering promises against her skin. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life showing you how loved you are," he said. "Every day, every hour, every second. You'll never doubt again, never feel insecure again, because I'm going to spend every moment proving that you're my choice. Always." Holly lifted her face to look at him, and what she saw in his eyes made her feel like she was floating. Love, pure, true, and eternal. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life choosing you back," she promised. "Because you're not just my husband on paper, Dylan. You're my partner, my best friend, my great love, my forever." He kissed her again, soft, long, full of promises that didn't need words. And there, in that room in Santorini, with the sun finally breaking through the clouds and filling the space with golden light, they began again. Not as strangers trapped in a marriage of convenience, but as soulmates who had found each other against all odds, as lovers who had been tested and came out stronger, as husband and wife. For real this time, forever. They told him he wouldn't be able to satisfy a woman. They said he was cold, distant, incapable of loving. But in truth, Dylan was a man who loved too intensely, so much that it was frightening. And Holly? She discovered that the greatest danger wasn't in the man everyone judged incapable, but in allowing herself to be loved completely, without reservations, without fear. Because sometimes courage isn't in fighting against love, but in surrendering to it. And when two wounded hearts choose to trust again, choose to surrender again, choose to love despite the fear, they don't just heal, they transform. They become something greater than they were alone. Would you have the courage to surrender like that? To love without reservations, even when fear whispers that you're not enough? If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave your like and become a member to get early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt it was truly worth listening to, also click the Worth It button. Your gesture makes all the difference and helps us continue bringing stories that move you.